This is our survey of the Old Testament. And again, a survey is a high-level view of the Old Testament. There are thousands of years covered from Genesis to Malachi. And we could spend years and years and years studying through all of the text. But we're not going to do that. We're trying to do this in 13 weeks or so. It won't go that fast, but we're trying to do this in much less time than years. And so if you would go ahead and turn to Numbers chapter 12 is kind of where we'll start in just a second. So after the Pentateuch handout that I think everyone has, or is certainly available, I have some up here too. I gave a one-page introduction to the books of history, and then I have the Joshua, Judges, Ruth, which are the first three books of history, printed out and ready to go. I don't think we'll get there tonight based on my past performance, and so I didn't want to hand it out and just give you something to carry around. You're welcome to it. It's here if you want to take it home and look at it. But and I put it on Facebook on the group, but just so everyone has everything that we could possibly get into tonight. But I don't think we will. I also have a timeline printed for the books of history. I didn't create one for the Pentateuch. It covers, a couple thousand years, and there's a million little things you can. Sorry, I'll just grab mine. There's a million things you can put in a timeline, and they can become very complicated and very messy very quickly. And so what I chose to do instead, because I could spend forever making a timeline, and it might or might not be accurate because there's a lot of it's an unknown, is I created one for the books of history, which cover really right about 1,000 years, maybe 1,006 years. If you start, which we're not there, we'll get into history, but if you start with Joshua and you go to the end of Malachi, you really start in like 1400 and you end at 400 BC. And so what I did was I took that 1,000 years and I broke it down in a couple of different segments that we'll be talking about. And then as we go, you're welcome to take one of these and maybe make a mark of where the books are in your own handwriting, because mine is terrible. And I didn't know exactly how to format it or how much you would care about. But to me, it gives kind of a bird's eye view of the breakdown. So if we get into that, we'll hand this out to anyone who might want it tonight, and that might help us as well. All right. So quick review. The purpose of the Old Testament is for our learning. We get a better understanding of God, of God's love, of how God interacts with His people. We see how God is involved in the lives of men, and we've talked about big themes that we find in the Old Testament that certainly carry over to us. There is the theme of covenant or agreement. That's the biggest one, I think. God begins with Moses, and he tells him all of this land is going to be yours. There's this land promise to the people. That Israel, the descendants from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, will be God's chosen people. We see grace throughout the Old Testament. We certainly see sacrifice in the Old Testament, and that carries over probably more than we often consider into the New Testament. We see prophecy in the Old Testament, God communicating with men. We see hope. For much of the Old Testament, they're headed toward the promised land. There is something better, just over there. If we can just make it, there is this hope of this better place. And certainly as Christians, we have a hope of a promised land, of a home in heaven with God one day. And then throughout the entire Bible, the greatest theme there is Jesus. In the Old Testament, it is that Jesus is coming. And in the New Testament, as you begin through the Gospels and into the book of Acts, it is that He is here. And when you get past Acts chapter 1 and verse 11, it becomes He's coming again. And we're in the He's coming again phase of things now. We talk about the breakdown, and we'll do this and then we'll be done with our review. But the breakdown of the 39 books of the Old Testament, what's the number sequence that we talk about? 512, 5512. That makes my heart warm. And I know it's just a bunch of numbers, but we're going to do that every time just because this is our chance to say it. If I said that in a sermon, it'd be weird, and so we're going to say it every time. But 512, 5512. The first 5 books are called the what? the Pentateuch, the Torah, the law of Moses, really that's the most specific. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The second 12 books, or the second chunk, is the books of history. 5:12. What's the 5 after that? Poetry. 5 again, major prophets. And the last 12 are the... And why are the major prophets called the major prophets and the minor prophets called the minor prophets? I don't know what you said, but I'm pretty sure Joanna did this. And it means that the major prophets are bigger, or she went fishing and she's trying to tell me a story. I don't know. But major prophets are more volume than the minor prophets. Again, nothing to do with age or importance. Just the size of the books. And if you think about some of the major prophets, when you get there, how many chapters there are in the book of Isaiah, it's a lot different than Obadiah. That's our review. Let me find my spot one more time, and we'll be in Numbers chapter 12. What I want us to really understand or remember about the book of Numbers is that in the book of Genesis, we started with creation and we end as this people land in Egypt. And so at the end of Genesis, they are all in Egypt. The book of Exodus begins, and really 400 years has passed, and now this nation of people in Exodus, in Egypt, is going to leave Egypt and head toward Mount Sinai. And so Genesis is creation to Egypt. Exodus is Egypt to Mount Sinai. And then in the book of Numbers, in Leviticus, you get the law, you get all kinds of direction for the people to make them holy. You talk about the tabernacle and what they're going to do as they travel into the promised land. You get into the book of Numbers, and the entire book of Numbers is that time of wandering in the wilderness. And so whenever you hear of an event or we talk about, well, they wandered for 40 years, that's from the book of Numbers. That's what took place. They weren't supposed to wander for 40 years. God's plan was for them to leave Mount Sinai and travel to the promised land and go in there and clean house and give them that land. But they sinned, and so God changed the plan and punished them so that they'd be in the desert or the wilderness for 40 years. And again, let me find my spot here in my notes. Sorry. I was in the wrong book. Okay. Two things also happen in the book of Numbers. The people are numbered twice. And so when they come out of Egypt, they're numbered as a people, and it's the number of men who are able to fight. They're about to go into the promised land and fight, and so they take this census of men who are over 20 and able-bodied and ready to go, and there's over 600,000. At the end of the book of Numbers, they do that again because now they're going to go into the promised land. So they take a census because God's about to take them into the promised land. Then they mess up really bad. God changes it, says you're going to be in the desert for 40 years. And so after that 40 years, they take the census again. And we'll see some of that tonight. So in Numbers chapter 12, during this wandering, one of the things that happens in 12 is that Aaron and Miriam speak against Moses. And I just wanted us to read this because I think we have time. And I think it's important. Moses is God's, chosen leader. He's the one that stands before God on Mount Sinai and brings those 10 commandments down. In chapter 12, beginning in verse 1, read with me there. Then Miriam and Aaron, and these are the sister and brother of Moses, spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And remember, who's the author of the book of Numbers? Moses. And so think about Moses writing this down, too. It's kind of funny. And they said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well?" And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than any man who is on the face of the earth. Verse 4. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses and Aaron and to Miriam, "You three come out of the tent of meeting." So 3 of them came out. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the doorway of the tent, and he called Aaron and Miriam. When they had both come forward, he said, "Hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, shall make myself known to him in a vision. I shall speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, even openly, and not in dark sayings. And he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then are you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" So the anger of the Lord burned against them, and he departed. But when the cloud had withdrawn from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, as white as snow. As Aaron turned toward Miriam, behold, she was leprous. Then Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, I beg you, do not account this sin to us, in which we have acted foolishly, and in which we have sinned. O do not let her be like one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away, when he comes from his mother's womb. Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, O God, heal her, I pray. But the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, would she not bear the shame or her shame for 7 days? Let her be shut up for 7 days outside the camp, and afterward she may again be received. So Moses is God's chosen man, and Moses is the most humble man on the face of the earth. And Miriam and Aaron say, God talks to all of us. We all hear God's voice. What's the big deal about this Moses? Why did he marry this lady, this Cushite woman? They don't like his wife, and they think he's not as great as he seems. And God is very clear that I speak to Moses unlike I speak to any other. And because they grumbled against Moses, God calls him out and says, why wouldn't you be afraid of him like you'd be afraid of me? He's the guy that speaks for me. He stands with me. We speak mouth to mouth. And so as a punishment, Miriam becomes leprous. And she gets the disease of leprosy, whatever that was. There's some debate today if leprosy that we know is the same as the skin disease that we're talking about here. But she becomes leprous, and Moses pleads with God to heal her. And so I think, again, you see the humility of Moses, kind of what a strong leader he was. And you also see, as I have in my notes, that God means business. He's dead serious about the laws that he's giving, the organization that he's put together here, what he's intending for his people. He's not joking around about it. Any comments on that or questions before we jump into the next section?
So why didn't Aaron have leprosy?
Aaron is the great unknown. I don't know. Maybe he already had it. No, I don't. That's a dumb answer. There is often a question, and we've talked about it a few times in here. Aaron seems to get away with a lot and kind of get by with it. And I don't know why Miriam was chosen, except she was the one talking, I guess. Maybe she's the one that spoke, or she was the ringleader. Any thoughts on that? Okay. No thoughts. Okay. That's all I've got, Jolene. I don't know. I've wondered about it. We see Aaron do a lot of things, and Miriam seems to get it pretty harsh here.
I wonder if maybe because she was a woman and she seems to be the one who's speaking out most, and that would not be...
I think it's actually because Aaron's the high priest. I think that has to do with it. I think because he stands before God in that role, that to make him unclean, sorry, it took me a minute to recall, to make him unclean with leprosy would really mess things up. And so I think he gets a bit of a pass in that way. I'm just talking about the physical ailment there, the uncleanliness. That wouldn't work so great as far as tabernacle worship goes. Any thoughts on that? Are you guys all talking and your masks are muffling the sounds?
Well, I think the fact that the punishment was there for Miriam, I think it's important for the people to see, because just because they're related to Moses,
Yeah.
she still got punished. In our society, there's so much nepotism and good old boy networks and different things like that. God didn't play that game, and so the fact that we're related, maybe whether he didn't kill them.
Yeah.
But they did get punished. Aaron they didn't make an exception for him to go to the promised land. And I think it's like you said, the high priest. Maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, just keeping him clean because he has a different role before God and among the people might be it. But yeah, God isn't playing favorites at all. You don't get a pass, Miriam, because you're a brother or sister of Moses. They were talking out of turn, and obviously we might read that too and think, well, what's the big deal? It was obviously a big deal. How they said it or what they were saying was maybe even worse than it sounds. God took it very seriously. Anything else? Okay, let's roll into the chapter 13 and 14, because this is very important, and I definitely wanted us to spend some time reading. In chapter 13 and 14, it's the spies that bring back the bad report, and we're generally familiar with this, I think most of us. But God tells Moses, I want you to send some spies into the promised land. They've left Mount Sinai. They're headed toward the promised land. They haven't been out of Egypt that long. This is just at the beginning of this 40-year period. And God says, I want you to send some spies into the land. And so look at chapter 13 and verse 23. They came to the valley of Eshcol, and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two men with some of the pomegranates and the figs. Skip down to 25. When they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregations of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. They go into the spy out the land, the promised land that God's promised for hundreds of years. And they've been told it flows with milk and honey. This is a good and spacious land. They go and they say, you're absolutely right. Look at the fruit we brought back. And there's this giant cluster of grapes they have on a pole. The picture I remember on the flannel board was two men with a pole and these giant grapes, right? We've all seen that. They bring that back and they say, it was an amazing place. And look even at the fruit that we found there. But there's a problem. We're never going to be able to take this land. The people there are huge. The giants live there. The cities are fortified and large. There's too many people. We're not fighting people. We just came out of Egypt as slaves. We might be shepherds. We don't have any weapons of war, the kind of attitude they had. Verse 30, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us. Skip down to chapter 14. Then all the congregation lifted up their voices, and they cried, and the people wept that night. All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. He said, look, Moses still wants to go in the promised land. We're all going to die. You heard the spies. We don't have a chance. Who's Caleb? This guy's talking crazy. It's kind of the attitude they have. We should have just died in Egypt. We should have just died in the wilderness. Or that's what's going to happen now. We're just going to die out here. Verse 6, Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregations of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. And if the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into that land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Verse 11, the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me? And how long will they not believe in me, despite the signs which I have performed in their midst? I will smite them with pestilence and dispossess them, and I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they. But Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear of it, for by your strength you brought these people out from their midst. And they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. And they've heard of you, O Lord. They've heard, O Lord, that you're in the midst of the people. For you, O Lord, are seen eye to eye with your cloud, while your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now if you slay this people as one man, then the nations who have heard of your fame will say, because the Lord could not bring this people into the land which he had promised them by oath, therefore he slaughtered them in the wilderness. And this is at least the second time we've seen Moses do this, where God says, I've had enough with these people. They grumble and they complain. I'm going to kill them all. And Moses says, no. And God says, I'm going to kill them all, and instead, Moses, I'm going to make of you a great nation. These are going to be not the Israelites, they're going to be the Mosesites. And Moses says, please don't do that. If you do that, if you kill all these people, God, the Egyptians are going to say, what in the world? We thought this God was good, and here he killed all his people. And if you do that, all the inhabitants of this land are going to hear about it. And they know you're with us, and they're going to see this, and they're going to think he couldn't do what he promised he would do for generations. And so, again, God calms down, he steps back, and he changes his mind before Moses. In verse 20, so the Lord said, I have pardoned them according to your word. Moses intercedes for the people. But indeed, as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord. Surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs, which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times, have not listened to my voice, shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurn me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has had a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. Okay, so they left Egypt. They watched the Red Sea parted. They saw the power of God through all the plagues before that. They see the Egyptian army destroyed. They go to Mount Sinai. They feel it rumbling. They hear that trumpet sound, that loud roar. They're scared to death because they know God's on the mountain. They know Moses stands before God. They've seen the manna and the quail and the rock give water, all kinds of stuff. God, now they're in the wilderness. They keep grumbling, keep grumbling, keep grumbling. They're on the verge of entering the promised land, hundreds of years in the making. They grumble so much against God, he's ready to kill them once again. Moses intercedes, and God says, fine, I'm not going to kill them, but here's what's going to happen. Not one man that left Egypt, that saw all the things I did in Egypt, that has seen all the signs since then, is going to enter into that promised land. It's not going to happen. The only exception we see is Joshua and Caleb, the 2 spies who believed and trusted in God. Everyone else, and we're talking about 20 years or older, that were in that census, everyone else is going to die in the wilderness. And what I want us to make sure we remember, this is why they wandered for 40 years. This event right here. It was not God's plan that they wandered for 40 years. He wanted to take them right in, but because of that, they wandered. Any thoughts, any comments? Later, he says, just a year for every day you spent in the land, you're going to wander in the wilderness. And so that's God's punishment. And he lets them die off. And if you have a comment, I'll be right back. The rest of the book, what you see is rebellion after rebellion. And part of it is these men say, look, we're not going to the promised land anyway. It's like the guy on death row. Why does he want to obey the rules? You know, in our minds we think, that guy does whatever. Keep trying to escape. Why not try to escape? Because you've got nothing to lose. That's kind of what we have here, is a bunch of people that give up then. We're not entering the promised land, and just continually rebel against God for the rest of the book of Numbers. For the rest of the Pentateuch, really. Any thoughts? Comments? Preguntas, as they say in Espanol. Not one comment. Okay. Is that clear? Does that... I used to have a gap in my knowledge as a kid. I never quite connected all those dots really well, and I'm spending a little bit of time on it. You probably were all 10 miles ahead of me. So, in chapter 16, we see Korah's... Yeah, Brandon. Is this just a nice comment?
Yeah, I think there's a gap in my knowledge because I always envisioned all of this happening at the foot of Mount Sinai.
Okay.
Where is all this happening?
Well...
And maybe we don't know.
No, you do. We don't have a map handy, and I can't remember all the names, but...
Do they go to the wilderness and then...
Well, so... This is probably not smart. Egypt's over here. They leave Egypt. They cross the Red Sea, and they go down to Mount Sinai. It's down here. So we think. It's not like 100%. There's not like a marker where it says Moses was here. And then they start traveling up to the Promised Land. The Promised Land has the Jordan River, and everything west of the Jordan is... And we'll see a map next time, okay? It's in our notes, actually. I put a map. Everything west of the Jordan is the Promised Land that they're going to inherit. And they end up inheriting some on the east, too. But they come up this side, they don't quite enter the Promised Land, and sends the spies in. And what they end up doing before they enter is they come around this side and go into the Promised Land that way. So they're on their way. They're just heading from Sinai this way. What happens is they now sin, and God says, you're going to wander for 40 years, and so they kind of do this for 40 years. And not really that directly in a circle, but they haven't made it. They're not wandering. They're headed a beeline for the Promised Land. Anybody else? Probably a good map in your Bible, too. But Gary, go ahead.
Isn't it estimated
Yeah, that's the number that pops in my mind too. About 12 days to travel if they'd just gone straight shot instead of 40 years. Yeah.
They also had an encounter with their cousins.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. There's a couple of them at the beginning, and there's a couple of them at the beginning and at the end, and they weren't alone the whole time. But yeah, a couple of encounters there. Anybody else? Okay. In chapter 16, we see Korah's rebellion. If you were here Sunday morning, we talked about that. And so we won't spend a lot of time there. But again, here are a bunch of guys that are told, you're not getting in the promised land. You're going to wander for 40 years in the desert. And more than that, you're going to die in the wilderness. Your children will go in the promised land, but you're not going to. Korah's rebellion. In chapter 17, you can look it up when you study through it. But Aaron's vindication, we see who Aaron is and why God has chosen him, or his prominent role there. In chapter 20, if you skip down, there's the sin of Moses, the sin that keeps Moses out of the promised land. And turn to chapter 20. I want to read verse 12 there. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given to them. And that's just saying Moses is not going to enter the land of promise, and neither is Aaron. And remember, he struck the rock, and he wasn't supposed to strike the rock. He was supposed to follow God's commands. That's a little difficult for me to explain. It's kind of a tricky passage. A lot of people have an idea, and they'll say, well, you see the pride of Moses, or you see a rebellion in Moses. And it's a little difficult for me to wrap my head around that Moses doesn't get into the promised land. I'm okay with it, but I can't quite talk through it with boldness yet. Gary. Give us boldness, Gary.
Does Christ not refer to himself as the waters of life?
Okay, I think so.
I think it's been, I can remember that, if you put yourself in Moses' position, he actually probably struck Christ
Okay.
in striking the rock. The water that would flow from the rock was water of life. That's the only way they had life.
So-
was water.
So I'm kind of repeating here and I think maybe just because it's miraculously provided to them by the presence of God, when Moses strikes that, he's committing an offense against God, and you're connecting it to even striking Christ in some sense.
It seemed like I remember studying that.
Okay. I don't remember that connection, but that's interesting. I'll have to look at that myself. Anybody else?
I've heard too that could have been because he said, shall we bring water for you?
Took some credit for it? Okay.
Rather than giving God the credit.
Yeah, I think that's what I recall most too, that he took some credit for it instead of handing the credit to God completely. And he was in a mood at the time too. Moses was. So, but you see again, God takes this seriously, right? There's a consequence to that sin, even for Moses. And you feel bad for Moses. He gets to sit up and look at the promised land and see what he wandered for 40 years too, but I know exactly where Moses is right now, and he's not worried about it any longer. So we know he got his eternal reward. But anybody else? Okay. In chapters 22 through 24, we read about Balaam. We remember Balaam with his talking donkey, and he was hired to curse the Israelites. In chapter 25, if we kept going, again, all these rebellions, we see the sin at Peor, and it is a very grotesque sin of the people, and they're punished greatly for it. You can study that, but all these things you may have heard of. The second numbering takes place, where again, we're getting ready to enter the promised land in chapter 26. They're determining the number of men, 20 and above, the men who are able to go to war. They're determining the size of each tribe. Remember, there are the 12 tribes of Israel, and technically we have 13 tribes. Does anyone remember why we have 13 instead of 12?
Two sons of Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph was in Egypt and he had 2 sons, and those 2 sons got an inheritance. Is that Ephraim and Manasseh? Okay. I hope that's right. Ephraim's one of them. I think Manasseh's the other. They each got an inheritance too. So the 12 sons of Israel Jacob became 13. And so all of these tribes are numbered, and we find out that there's 601,730 men who are able to fight. And all of those who came out of Egypt in that category, that age group, who were numbered the previous time, have died in the wilderness. The only exceptions are Joshua and Caleb. At the end of the book in chapter 27, Caleb is commissioned. He's now going to lead the people. Moses makes it clear that he's going to be the successor. In chapter 35, at the end of the book, we read about the cities of refuge. And it's kind of the intent of God to have these cities of refuge. They haven't entered into the promised land yet, but when they do, God's laying this out for them. And what the cities of refuge were these cities in and among the promised land, where if I accidentally killed Eddie, Eddie's family could kill me. But if I ran to a city of refuge and I got there in time and I got in the city, I was safe and he couldn't kill me anymore. And that's the law. And it's God's law. If I killed Eddie, his family has the right to avenge his death against me. But if I make it to the city of refuge, the closest one, like an internet hotspot, I'm safe until I leave, and then they can wait outside and kill me, or until the high priest dies and there's a new high priest, and then all bets are off and I'm free to go, which is a really weird thing. But there's a lot of New Testament implications to that. We're not going to dive into the deep stuff. We'll study it sometime deeper. But that is beginning to be set up there at the end of the book. There are 48 cities given to the Levites. The tribe of Levi aren't given any land. They're not giving a territory. Instead, they're given cities to live in because they're the priests. And 6 of the 48 are designated as cities of refuge. There are 3 cities of refuge on the east side of the Jordan River and 3 on the west side of the Jordan River. And again, we'll look at that map next time for sure. The book of Deuteronomy we have very short notes. Again, written by Moses around 1400 BC, and basically it's 3 sermons that Moses gives before he dies. More of Deuteronomy is quoted in the New Testament than any other Old Testament book. And if I'm not mistaken, when Christ is tempted and he quotes Scripture, and we always say that, each time he quotes from the book of Deuteronomy. The name itself, Deuteronomy, is the second law, and you can hear that probably in the name. The 10 Commandments are repeated. Most of the laws that Moses has already given are all repeated in this book. It is a repeat of the law of Moses. The purpose of the book is to lead Israel to obedience and to warn them about their disobedience. It's very clear in the book that if you obey, God is going to bless you, and if you disobey, you're going to be cursed. And so what he's saying is, here at the end of this, be obedient to God. If you don't, there's a consequence for it. The key verse in Deuteronomy is Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. The Jews today, even, that passage of Scripture in a verse or two before that is the Shema, which is, I think, part of their morning and evening prayers, that every faithful Jew would know those verses 1,000 times by heart. Just the most important text in the Bible to them. Major events in the book of Deuteronomy. Again, 3 sermons of Moses. Joshua is appointed, again, chapter 31. Moses gives this farewell song and the blessing of Moses, and then Moses dies. And I've talked about this before, but one of my favorite songs in the songbook is On Jordan's Stormy Banks I Stand. Sing the song of Moses and the Lamb by and by, and dwell with Jesus evermore. It's all about, or there's a verse in there at least, that references this song of Moses. You're standing at the edge of the promised land. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand. You're about to cross the Jordan River. Sing the song of Moses and the Lamb by and by. And that song is recorded for us that Moses gives to the people. He sings before the people. And so it's okay for preachers to lead songs from now on. And then we see Moses die at the end there. There's some interesting stuff, but we won't take time to read those passages. As we close then, the review of the Pentateuch, I just want to make sure this is what we're trying to grasp, is that Genesis is creation to Egypt. Exodus is Egypt to Mount Sinai. Keep in your mind as they're traveling here. Leviticus is preparing the people for holiness, preparing them to worship God. They've been in Egypt, surrounded by Egyptian worship for 400 years. The book of Numbers is preparing them to enter into the promised land. They're counted so they can go to war, then they're punished. They're counted again so they can go to war and take the land. And the book of Deuteronomy is Moses repeating the law before he dies. And so as we finish the Pentateuch, they're standing there on the cusp of entering that land they've waited for so long. And so everything you know about the Old Testament, desert wanderings and Exodus and creation, we've passed it all now. And so next week we'll start in the books of history. And everything from here on out, the books of history are the 12 books, but they begin with Joshua and they end in time at the end of Malachi. They cover the entirety of the Old Testament that's left. And so, again, that 1,000 years. And we'll do the timeline next week. But Joshua's a very exciting book. It's a book of conquest as they enter into the land. And that's basically all it covers, about 25 years of going in there and knocking heads and taking over. And then you see the land divvied up and you see the people begin dwelling there. Then we see the period of the judges. Then we see the period of the kings. And then everything falls apart. We see then the divided kingdom. We see then the exile. And then they come back to their land and we see things restored. And then we wait for Jesus for 400 years.